So you have a really interesting backstory in how you got to your business. And one of the things I realized or was reading about was that in your 20s you were in academia. You were working in and you were when you were working in that area, you got your degrees and your masters and then started it. When did you realize that your dream job wasn't in
What
academia?
people gave me advice that I didn't pay attention to. So when I was living in London and teaching, having finished my master's, one of my private clients was the head of a very large company from Eastern Europe, like billions and millions of dollars. They owned like hundreds of helicopters and thousands of trucks. Like he drew a picture once of all the departments of their company, and it was so many boxes. So just like massive, successful conglomerate. And he said, I don't doing this. You're not a teacher. You want to run a business. And I was like, no, I love doing this. And so I didn't listen. And then the next phase for me was I've always run small businesses on the side. I just never took them seriously. I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur because you think of the way to become an inventor is your parents are inventors. That's how I see it. You're only an entrepreneur if your parents are entrepreneurs. It seems like that's how you get into that field. So I never really saw myself that way. But I was doing things as young as 14, where I'd buy a pizza for $10 and sell it for $2 a slice and make a $6 profit. So I was dabbling in stuff as young as maybe 12 years old. I just didn't see it that way. I just, it's hard to believe as much as I say I don't like side hustling. I saw it as hustling, like just generating a little bit of revenue, a little bit of spending cash, taking your allowance and stretching it a little further. So I never thought of what I started, even though I started a lot of businesses. I started a tutoring agency. I always just used that to leverage like getting bigger jobs. So I didn't really see myself as someone who could start my own business until I was in my 30s. So I didn't start my own business until I peaked in my career. So I got my dream job at 29 and hated it within a week. I was like, oh my gosh, my dream came true and I regret it completely. I was working at the top in my field of English as a foreign language. I was working in the largest program at the best university in the world. There was literally no higher job. There was nowhere to go up. At 29, I had peaked. The only thing that could happen is if my manager died, then I could move up one level. But other than that, there was no other position. There was no other moves. And I didn't like it. I wasn't happy. It turned out my dream wasn't what my dream was. And I just need to, you start to reach this point where you want to be in control. And that's the real critical element of entrepreneurship is that it's like a trapeze with no net. So you have to be able to handle the high risk in order to enjoy the high reward. And there's something about having a really bad
Mhm.
month and then a really good month that that's the feeling that I love. Like the bullfighter waiting for the bull that almost gets you. So I like both parts. I like the risk and the reward. And as I started to realize that when I lost that job, I said, I never want someone to have control over my destiny again. And since then, I've seen it happen to so many of my friends where they work at huge companies and they get downsized because of something that wasn't their fault.
Yeah, yeah. That security that people think they get in a big corporate, like I worked in corporate for 14 years. We probably had 2 or 3 cycles of redundancies in those 12, 14 years. So that security that people think they always have, it doesn't really exist. There's no
Those have
longer
actually
jobs
never
for life
existed outside
within
of
these sorts
Japan.
of
I don't know
corporates, is
why
there?
people think jobs for life existed, and they stopped existing in Japan in the 80s. So existed in one country for a short window of time, and they haven't existed for over 40 years. There's this idea that we have that loyalty from a corporation is a two-way street, that if I work really hard and put in extra hours, that my boss will care about me. And a lot of people have found out over the last few years, especially, that it's not that way, that your company does not care about you. And company math is like this:
Mm.
as an employee, your boss has to pay you less than you're worth in order for the company to be profitable. If you paid everyone exactly the amount of revenue they generated for the company to operate at break even, which is a high risk position, they couldn't pay the investors or the shareholders. The job of your boss is to keep you in a perpetual state of agitation in between hope of a raise and fear of being fired. So they want to keep you bouncing between these two like magnetic poles, if you will, right? So you're constantly moving back and forth. Am I going to get fired? Maybe I'll get a raise. Am I going to get fired? Maybe I'll get a raise. And it creates, of course, a massive amount of long-term stress. And there is no loyalty. And the same thing, I have
Yeah.
employees. And if one of my kids gets sick and I have to just raid the company coffers to pay for their medical bills and fire my team, I will. And everyone would. So this idea that loyalty is a two-way street, it doesn't exist. And a lot of people learn this the hard way, unfortunately. But I've been shouting from the mountaintop for over 10 years about this, almost 14 years about it now, that you are the only person in charge of your destiny. This doesn't mean you have to be an entrepreneur. You can also treat your career the same way. So the reason I got so high in my career is that I jumped between different universities when other people
Yeah.
were like, you just wait for your boss to give you a raise. And I was like, no, I'll just jump. I'll just use my skills to create an awesome resume, create an awesome presentation, go do a job interview and jump to another university. That's how you can move up, is by jumping between things. If you treat your career like entrepreneurship, because no one else is going to, nobody else cares about you. Like, and that's a harsh lesson to learn, but the earlier you learn it, like the more successful you'll be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.